Coming from the YDN building, it's YTV's Political Roundtable. I'm Tommy Atlee, your moderator. On the left, we have Esul Burton, member of Yale Dems. On the right, we have Zach Young, member of the William F. Buckley program. And voicing the opinion of the center, we have Emil Friedman, member of both groups. So let's get started with our first question. What does the name change accomplish in your eyes, and is the movement for changing buildings' names at Yale over? Let's start with Esul.
Yeah, so I think that the Calhoun renaming was really important. I think it's ludicrous that we had his name on our campus for so long, because when you name an institution or a building on this campus after a person, like, that is an honorary trait. And so that means Yale, for a really long time, was implicitly condoning his views. These are views that I don't think we should embody as a university or a campus, and are really views that should not be in the public sphere right now. And so I think that I think it's really important that they changed it, although I do have, and I think people have expressed these concerns about the fact that they didn't name it after a white woman instead of another person of color, or preferably a woman of color.
Emil, do you have anything to respond to that?
What I will say, even if you disagree or agree with the decision, I think it shows just how powerful activism and protest, especially at the college level, can be. Because this wasn't an administrative decision purely, it was also the forces of these continuous protests every Friday, so every op-ed. I think it made a kind of an overwhelming decision. I guess my concern with the name change is that it was an easy issue to talk about. It was an easy thing to tweet about and write op-eds about. I'd like to see this campus take the passion and the vigor that we took towards the name change and then apply it to really hard issues like class. The recent statistic we saw in the Times, we are one of about 30 colleges in this country where we have more students from the top 1% than the bottom 60%. That is an insane statistic, and I'd like to see us start having really tough conversations about what kind of groups of students we should be attracting here, what the mission of Yale is from a socioeconomic perspective. So moving beyond just the kind of the identity politics issues that we can latch on to, and talk about the issues that I think will kind of set our trajectory for the next 100 years.
I think Emil makes a very strong point when he talks about just the perception of Yale students fighting over what we name our buildings in a world where there are so many problems and in a country that demands a lot of attention and healing. And so I think a lot of onlookers who look at Yale students think, oh, these Yale students are pretty self-obsessed. They must think when they're marching in the streets to rename Calhoun College. What even is Calhoun College? What even is a residential college? What about the fact that, and I mean, you can list off the number of issues that I think people are expecting the future leaders of this country and that hopefully Yale would be producing to have their minds on. In terms of, I think Esul makes an interesting point, and I appreciate her voicing it, which is this idea that we're implicitly condoning Calhoun's pro-slavery views as an institution by keeping him on the building. I'm skeptical of the idea that anyone had the impression that Yale is condoning slavery. I think just because you had the name doesn't necessarily mean that there was any ambiguity about where Yale stands on the topic of slavery. That said, I really look at this issue in two ways. I think the outcome is probably fine. If I were to pick a name for college and I was given the options Grace Murray Hopper and John C. Calhoun, I would probably pick the former.
Yeah.
But the process is actually pretty disturbing because you had President Salovey come out, make a position, say we need to remember the scars of our history and we need to move on, and then suddenly get totally reversed. Now people are lauding the student activists, but this wasn't the students. This was the faculty. This was the faculty over summer when the students had left, gone on to their internships, deciding to voice a letter. And it showed where the real power in this university lies. It doesn't lie with President Salovey, it lies with his colleagues. And I think it's a dangerous precedent when our leadership from the school is coming from the faculty, as opposed to from the Yale Corporation and the president, who are actually supposed to check the influence of the faculty.
I mean, I guess I'd quickly respond to that by saying that, the only reason I think a lot of faculty did end up writing that letter was because of student activism. I think that you had a lot of faculty in their own columns talk about how they reversed their opinions on the naming of Calhoun, right? You have Jonathan Holloway in his recent op-ed who said at one point he did support retaining the name Calhoun, and that opinion slowly changed, and he's now in support of Hopper College. And so I think that's really important to remember, and that sort of the faculty writing a letter is not independent of the work that's on this campus. And I think in response to your opinion about class, I think that I totally agree with that. I think one thing we forget is class and race are extremely intertwined in America. And so when you voice issues about race, which a lot of groups on this campus do, maybe not to maybe they're not heard as loudly as they are when we talk about renaming Calhoun, but they do voice those concerns, and that's sort of intertwined with class. But on the other hand, when you have people who are opposing the naming of Calhoun, right, where are they leading the charge on these issues of class and of, other issues that you say are important if they're going to be future leaders in America? And so you sort of have one side that's saying this is not what we should focus on, and yet they're not leading any charge of their own and trying to, sort of divert our attention to another issue. And so I think that's something that's really important to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say 2 points. First of all, your point about professors changing their opinion based on student activism, I think is totally right. Glenda Gilmore, famous Southern historian here, had this awesome op-ed last week where she essentially, talked about what her students taught her when it came to switching her opinion. Her opinion began kind of similar to mine in that there is progress and contradiction, but she found that her students taught her that the name change was the right idea. And while I disagree with that, I think that goes to the point of how powerful students can be in those kind of subtle ways. In terms of what people who aren't in favor of changing the name, what they were doing, I hate to use the silent majority cliche, but there are a lot of people here who talk about these things to one another, but they're not as comfortable voicing it as the activist group. This is a tough place to come from any issue like this from the right-leaning, non-activist perspective. You see it sometimes in the op-ed pages, but it's a lot harder to do that. Now, in terms of the class issue, I think that's something that would unify everybody. I think that most of the people who are talking about changing the Calhoun name identify as progressives. Well, if you're progressive, then let's be progressive about economics. The proportion of people here who come from private schools, the proportion of legacy admits, and again, the proportion from that top 1%, which the New York Times says at about 20% of Yale is in the top 1%, should anger everyone. That's not a partisan issue. That is a Yale issue. And I think that's really what we need to switch our focus on. And now that we're done with Calhoun, one way or the other, I think we can finally get to that.
We've come to the time in the program for political rants. Zach, why don't you start us off?
Sure. We're at a university with some of the brightest students from around the world who offer many gifts. And so one thing that I think concerns me about Yale today is this culture of self-censorship, that people feel like they can't voice an opinion, especially one that's different from the campus mainstream, without getting in trouble with their friends or being accused of something terrible. I think we need to bring back that culture of open inquiry, and we need to remind ourselves that we're very intelligent people. We can handle ideas. Having a new opinion or having an idea in your mind is not betraying the cause or turning your back on your peers. It's just being curious. So be curious, share ideas, and I think we'll have a much richer, elevated discourse like the one we're experiencing here.
Thanks. Emil?
All right, so I would like to rant about the Trump press conference that just happened today. He sounded like a deranged lunatic for an hour and a half, and let me tell you some of the things that he accomplished. First, he asked a black reporter to set up a meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus, asking if they're friends, as if all black people are friends. He said that he had the biggest electoral margin since Ronald Reagan, which was fact-checked on the spot by NBC News. Of course, that honor goes to Bush as a Republican. And Donald replied that he was given false information. The President of the United States was given false information about his win. He said that he's the least anti-Semitic and least racist person ever, before telling the Jewish reporter asking the question to sit down and be quiet because the question was unfair. The question was about anti-Semitism, of course. He said that he hasn't called Russia in years in the very same sentence that he said that he'd called Putin twice. He said we had a very smooth rollout of the travel ban. And he said that the news is fake because so much of the news is fake. And this is where it gets serious. The attack on the press by Donald is not only unhealthy for our democracy, but is an existential crisis for our democracy. It's unhealthy. Our free and fair press is how our democracy stands, because democracy is fragile, and I'm concerned about what he's doing to it.
Esul?
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to be ranting on a narrative that we've seen post-election. I think it's already been mentioned by a lot of people on the internet, but basically this whole white working class narrative and how that essentially lost Hillary the election. And I think that there are a couple misconceptions that are going around. One, I think that studies have shown that racism and sexism are better indicators of why people were Trump supporters more than anything else. I think, two, this whole idea of economic miscommunication on part of the Hillary campaign is false. I think that you have people of color who are also of working class that came out to vote for Hillary Clinton, clearly are still members of the Democratic Party, so I don't think this is purely a class issue. And I think, third, you see that in swing states especially, you have support for Hillary Clinton on economic issues even though they ended up voting for Trump, right? And so I think that on a lot of planes we misunderstand what went wrong in this election. I think we downplay the role of white supremacy, of racism, of bigotry in this election and in the electorate. I think we sort of conflate this idea that to be a racist you have to be explicit about your views, when in reality a lot of this comes out in subconscious support of certain policies and certain people like Trump who embody their internal ideas of what it means to live in a multicultural society. And so I think at the end of the day we need to reevaluate what it means, especially going forward, especially how we want to see the Democratic Party build a coalition for 2018. So.
All right, well, that's all we have for tonight. This has been YTV's Political Roundtable. Thank you to each of my guests for coming on and speaking, and thank you to you, the viewer, for watching.
This is Esther Richin reporting for YTV. Calhoun College is soon to be renamed after Grace Hopper. We are out here gauging student reaction to the decision of renaming.
Finally.
I'm actually surprised and very heartened by the fact that they did it this year.
All my friends now, like, they went through so